On July 30th, 2021, MLB's Twitter account tweeted a question. Was this the best trade deadline ever? Well, in terms of numbers, 2021 was a record-breaking year as a total of 158 players moved throughout the month of July. Perhaps you remember the Joey Gallo trade, which created only the third starting outfield trio in MLB history, where all three players previously recorded a 40 home run season. Or maybe you remember what happened 700 miles west of New York City, as the first place White Sox and fourth place Cubs had drastically different deadlines. The White Sox brought in reinforcements for their playoff push, while the Cubs were turning the page towards a new era. 2016 World Series winners Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, and Anthony Rizzo were all traded, and Jake Arrieta was released a couple weeks later. However, the Cubs weren't the only team dissolving their once great championship roster.
3-2. Nationals are world champions for the first time in franchise history.
The 2019 World Series was one for the ages. A tale where the underdog slayed a giant. I'm sure you remember Howie Kendrick's go-ahead home run in Game 7, but what you may not remember is that before this home run, the Nationals began the innings scoreless. Until this happened.
There's a run-up. That is a rocket to left, and the lead is cut in half.
Anthony Rendon not only set the stage for an incredible comeback win in Game 7, his tremendous 2019 season was crucial in this team's overall success. Given Rendon became just the 7th qualified third baseman since 2000 to have an OPS over 1,000, it's no wonder why he rejected a $200+ million offer from the Nationals, opting instead to sign a $245 million deal with the Angels. The Nationals re-signed World Series MVP Steven Strasburg a couple days earlier, but the departure of Rendon meant the disbanding of this World Series team had already begun. Then, a couple years later, Ken Rosenthal made a tweet. Breaking. Padres close to acquiring Max Scherzer. A tweet made 24 hours before the trade deadline. No, this wasn't a fake tweet like the one that fooled Jesse Rogers and Bob Nightingale. This was real. So, why were these recent World Series champions now on the verge of trading not only one of baseball's best pitchers, but one of the most important players in franchise history? Well, just as quickly as the Nationals rose to the top, they began their descent into a long rebuild. On opening day in 2021, the Nationals had a 22% chance of making the playoffs, their highest odds of that season. Ironic that on a day of commemorating the organization's greatest achievement, fans unknowingly witnessed the end of this team's peak. Following their second straight walk-off loss on July 26th, the rumors of Max Scherzer being placed on the trade block were becoming more real. After all, with Scherzer set to be a free agent after the season and still proving to be one of the league's best starting pitchers, he was the perfect trade candidate. Although, as a player with 10+ years of service time and at least 5 years with his current team, Scherzer had the right to veto any trade. He was absolutely willing to move to a new team, but his 10-5 rights gave him the unique opportunity to have a say in the ultimate destination if the Nationals are presented with multiple offers. As expected, numerous teams were interested in Scherzer, but sources said he strongly preferred the West Coast. With the NL West being a tightly contested 3-team race, any one of these teams were possible destinations. However, only one team employed the unpredictable GM known as AJ Preller.
Hosmer to right field, down the line, towards the pole. This game is tied. In the air to left field for Victor Caratini. Padres walk it off.
The Padres went into the 2021 season with the league's 4th best World Series odds. Unsurprisingly, the Dodgers were the only National League team with higher odds than the Padres, although no one could have expected the emergence of the Giants. The Padres weren't out of the race yet, but their pitching struggles in the month of July signaled what they needed to address. So that's why it wasn't at all surprising when Ken Rosenthal tweeted the day before the trade deadline that the Padres were on the verge of acquiring Scherzer. At least that's what it seemed like. Typically, when a reporter tweets a team is quote-unquote close to acquiring a player, it's a near certainty the deal will be finalized. a near certainty. 10 minutes after Rosenthal's tweet, John Heyman followed up by saying other teams were still in the mix. A little while later, Rosenthal himself clarified his report, saying the Nationals and Padres had agreed on players, but other teams were still in the mix, such as the Dodgers, Giants, Red Sox, and a mystery team, which was later found out to be the Angels. Well, funny enough, Scherzer did end up in LA, and he wasn't going alone.
What? What in the world just happened?
The Dodgers go and snatch not only Max Scherzer from the Padres, but they grab Trea Turner along with them.
I guess Scherzer didn't want to be on the same team as Daniel Camarena. But seriously, this was one of the most massive deadline deals in MLB history. Not only did arguably the league's best pitching staff fortify their rotation, a top 5 offense added a superstar shortstop who wasn't a free agent for another year. Plus, to top it all off, the Dodgers publicly humiliated the Padres in the process. Now, to clarify, I don't want to disparage Rosenthal's reputation. However, Rosenthal's initial report of Scherzer to the Padres seemed like a foregone conclusion until he clarified an hour later. So yeah, he got a bit ahead of himself. But maybe the Nationals front office leaked the status of the negotiations to gain more leverage over the Dodgers. After all, Scherzer never fully believed he was heading to the Padres because he hadn't heard anything from Nationals GM Mike Rizzo. Well, after Mike Rizzo made that phone call, not only had this indicated the beginning of a new era in DC, it drove the Dodgers and Padres seasons in drastically different directions. As the Dodgers fought the Giants for the top spot in the NL West, the Padres underwent a historic collapse. Sure, this was in part due to their inability to address starting pitching at the deadline. But it takes a whole team to become just the second team in MLB history to finish under 500 after being 16 games over 500, 100 games into the season. As the Padres now had an uncertain future, the Dodgers were thriving as Scherzer and Turner performed better than expected. In fact, Scherzer became just the 5th qualified pitcher since 1960 to have a season with at least a 1.60 ERA plus at the age of 36 or older. However, despite having the highest odds to win the World Series, they lost to the Braves in the NLCS. Notably, Turner was on a cold streak throughout the entire postseason, and despite Scherzer playing well, he left Game 2 of the NLCS with a dead arm, admitting he overcooked himself with 4 postseason appearances in 12 days. Overall, a lot went wrong. But the Dodgers were still in a great position heading into 2022. Sure, Corey Seager left, but they still had Trea Turner for another year. Plus, they signed 2020 MVP first baseman Freddie Freeman, giving them the best playoff odds in the league. Although, any future success was going to be without Scherzer, as he signed a 3-year deal with the Mets at a record AAV of $43.3 million. It was a steep price, but the potential of a rotation featuring the 1-2 punch of Scherzer and Jacob deGrom was too tempting for the Mets to pass up. Unfortunately, due to injury, deGrom didn't make his 2022 debut until August 2nd, the day of the trade deadline. Still, the Mets were doing just fine without deGrom, so his impending return was a giant trade deadline acquisition of its own. However, the return of deGrom wasn't the main story of the day.
So in my hands, I have a calendar, and I will be marking August 2nd, 2022 as one of the biggest days in the history of baseball.
Soto will end up on the Padres.
The Padres made one of the biggest deals ever by trading for 23-year-old superstar Juan Soto, who just so happened to be coming off one of the best months of his career. With this deal, the Nationals World Series era had officially dissolved, as the main stars from their championship team were either gone or had declined significantly. Fortunately, their farm system drastically improved following the trades of the previous 2 seasons, with the Padres in particular parting ways with multiple current and former top 100 prospects. Just looking at the trade package, it really makes me wonder if the Padres dealt someone like Robert Hassel III for Scherzer 1 year earlier, would they have been able to trade for Soto? After all, they weren't the only team vying for his services. Nonetheless, the acquisitions of Soto and all-star closer Josh Hader, among others, allowed the Padres to avoid another second-half collapse. This led to a wildcard matchup against the Mets, who were considered the series favorites, in part due to the pitching tandem of DeGrom and Scherzer. However, things didn't go as planned for the Mets.
San Diego will sail into the division series as they come to New York and win 2 out of 3, 6-0 the final.
Despite their underdog status, the Padres took the series in 3 games. The decision to start Scherzer in Game 1 instead of DeGrom backfired massively, and it was a precursor of the decline that was soon to come. As for the Padres, they were set to face Trea Turner and the Dodgers in the NLDS, a series where the Padres were even bigger underdogs, but ultimately came out on top. Funny enough, Trea Turner performed much better than Soto in this series, but it was Soto's game-tying hit in Game 4 that'll forever be remembered. However, the euphoria from this win was short-lived as the Padres lost to the Phillies in the NLCS. Despite how it all ended, these 3 teams were all in great positions to compete for the foreseeable future. So, what's happened since then? Well, the Dodgers lost Trea Turner to the Phillies, while also losing Gavin Lux for the year. Combine this with the Padres signing all-star shortstop Xander Bogaerts and the inevitable return of Fernando Tatis Jr., the Padres were projected to outperform the Dodgers. Although this has not been the case, as inconsistency has plagued the Padres season. Still, in the midst of a crowded wildcard race, the Padres decided against selling at the deadline, instead making a few trades to address their roster depth. However, the same can't be said about the Mets, whose season has been comparable to the Padres in terms of failing to live to expectations. But instead of doubling down, not only did they trade recently signed starter Justin Verlander, they also traded Max Scherzer to the Rangers. In fact, Scherzer himself said the Mets now view 2024 as a transitory year. So, with Scherzer in his age 38 season and experiencing some decline, it was best for both parties to move on. After going through this entire timeline, I have to say, the Nationals picked the perfect time to rebuild. Rendon hasn't stayed healthy since his departure, Scherzer is declining, Turner's contract doesn't make sense for a rebuilding team, and Soto had already declined a $440 million deal before being traded. Today, the Nationals have some interesting young players at the big league level, with many more in their top-rated farm system. Still, there's no way to predict the futures of all these teams and players, as so much has changed in the 2 years following the 2021 Scherzer saga. In some ways, the Rosenthal tweet not only illustrates how much influence a single trade can have, but it's also a thought experiment. What if the Padres actually made that trade? How much different would baseball be today? I guess we'll never know. And that's alright with me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, leave a like if you did, and subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks for watching.